There are minds that feel nothing, and when you come face to face with them, the absence is more unsettling than the presence of rage. They understand perfectly every motion, every outcome, with precise clarity. They can describe the fear in another's eyes, the tightening in a victim's chest, the ripple of anguish through a family. But none of it registers as it does in the average human mind. There is no internal tremor, no surge of guilt, no visceral reaction. Their understanding is detached, clinical, measured, and the longer you watch, the more you realize that empathy, the mechanism that restrains most, it is absent, muted, or inaccessible. Most of us experience friction when we contemplate harming another. Even when we rage, panic, or make a mistake, our nervous system reminds us that there is a cost, a flash of hesitation, a pulse of moral awareness. Something inside whispers that a boundary exists. For these men, that friction does not appear. Actions are weighed as variables. Risk versus reward, opportunity versus consequence. Emotion does not interfere. Nothing shakes the architecture of calculation. Victims are instruments, numbers, obstacles, or sources of stimulation. They are seen not as people with feelings, but as elements within a system, and the system obeys the rules of logic and efficiency, not morality. This absence of internal opposition allows repetition. It allows planning. It allows methodical execution without the turbulence that stops most people. When one enters that mental space, the internal dialogue is stark. This solves the problem. This eliminates risk. Be precise. No flash of conscience, no self-directed hesitation. These men do not experience themselves as monsters. Where emotion rules others, they believe they operate free of it. That belief shapes identity. Control itself becomes pleasurable. The fear of another, the yielding of a victim, creates a sense of clarity that most people cannot comprehend. Dominance becomes a form of stimulation, a substitute for the empathy that is absent. Repetition follows naturally because the reinforcement is consistent. An internal cost is negligible. Most attempts at rehabilitation hinge on empathy. They rely on activating moral reasoning, perspective-taking, emotional resonance. They assume these systems exist and can be awakened. But for men who are impervious to remorse, the language of morality is foreign. They can learn it, mimic it, and perform it convincingly. But the experience is strategic. I understand the pain I caused. I regret it. I wish to change. These statements, when emotion is absent, are tools, not confessions. Professionals quickly learn that behavior, not words, is the indicator of change. An offender can speak of conscience without ever feeling it, can replicate regret without experiencing guilt, and can perform empathy without any internal echo. This is what makes them unreachably dangerous. The absence of moral friction leaves only external consequence as a check. Without legal or structural restraint, their actions continue unimpeded inside the quiet of their minds. Every act is procedural. Assess, execute, conceal, adjust, repeat. Memory is retained. But memory without guilt does not punish. It informs, instructs, and guides future decisions. Every misstep is a lesson in efficiency. Every reaction is a data point. Hesitation is eliminated because internal warning systems are inert. The strategic mind replaces emotional restraint. Opportunities are calculated, consequences projected, and the sequence continues uninterrupted. Normalcy in public jobs, relationships. Social etiquette does not indicate empathy. It indicates adaptation. The ability to read, replicate, and manipulate social norms allows them to move through life undetected, shielded by the ordinary, hidden by routine. Colleagues are deceived, neighbors are oblivious. Friends are shocked when reality emerges. They were never apparent. The threat was always present beneath the surface, in the composure that concealed the void within. Understanding this is terrifying, because it removes the comforting notion that everyone has an internal break. That invisible friction that stops most people from committing extreme harm. For these men, that break is absent. The emotional vacuum enables not only planning and execution, but also repetition without the fatigue of conscience. Dominance, control, and impact replace empathy as sources of feedback. Each act reinforces the pattern. Each successful concealment sharpens methodology. Every interaction, every opportunity, every rehearsal is encoded in cold efficiency. What outsiders perceive as normal behavior, the calm, the adherence to routine. The polite manner is the outer surface of a mind capable of extreme calculation, entirely unaffected by the moral consequences that govern ordinary lives. They may smile at colleagues. They may assist neighbors. They may attend family dinners. They may appear helpful, engaged, and even charming. Normalcy is a cloak. Inside, the architecture of their mind is built to minimize internal resistance and maximize execution. The distinction between tool and ritual blurs. Repeated exposure to acts of harm can desensitize, creating patterns that evolve from necessity into fascination. The emotional emptiness, the moral gap, becomes not a deficit but a framework through which action is directed with precision. Dominance, manipulation, and control provide feedback that others receive from emotional resonance. In their absence, the mind constructs alternative reinforcement systems, cold, analytical, and utterly unfeeling. Some men cannot be reached, not because they are ignorant of consequence, but because consequence itself is the only measure they heed. Internal conflict does not intervene. External systems, law, surveillance, opportunity limitation become the only effective barriers. They navigate the world with awareness of social expectation, but without internalized moral guideposts. Every interaction is a calculation, every reaction a pattern to exploit. The horror lies not in a lack of intelligence or lack of understanding, but in the absence of internal regulation. Without that regulation, the execution of harm becomes systematic. Victims become variables. Dominance becomes measurable. Control becomes stimulation. Repetition becomes inevitable. And society, reliant on internal friction, is unprepared for minds that have none. Some men cannot be reached, not because they do not know, not because they cannot see, but because the mechanism that restrains most humans, the internal cost of harming another, is absent. When that system fails, all that remains is calculation, method, and the relentless pursuit of outcome. And when we attempt to enter that mind, we are left staring into an emptiness that is neither chaotic nor confused, neither enraged nor desperate. It is deliberate, composed, and chillingly effective. The only response is understanding, vigilance, and the cold acknowledgement that inside some men, emotional arrest is permanent, and the language of empathy, guilt, and shame is meaningless. The mind of a man who cannot feel is not empty in the conventional sense. It is not a void. It is organized, calculated, systematic. Every thought is a tool, every perception a variable, every interaction an equation to be solved. And yet, the observer cannot sense the internal architecture directly. All they see is the exterior calm, composed, adaptive, while underneath lies a precision engineered for detachment. It is the kind of mind that views other humans not as moral equals, but as movable pieces. Pieces whose reactions can be predicted, manipulated, and exploited. There is no internal friction to slow decision-making, no conscience to interrupt execution. The very qualities that allow ordinary people to function with restraint, shame, empathy, guilt, emotional resonance are absent, suppressed, or irrelevant. Without them, repetition of harm becomes not only possible, but disturbingly efficient. Consider an interaction in a controlled setting. An interview room, stark walls, a table separating investigator and subject. Evidence is laid out meticulously. Timelines, witness statements, forensic reports. A normal mind would twitch, flinch, or hesitate under the weight of such evidence, but the man across the table does not. He registers each point with clarity, nods as necessary, adjusts posture almost imperceptibly. He understands the impact of every act, yet he feels nothing. The observer senses the absence, a void that presses outward because it refuses to conform to expectations of emotional response. This is not apathy in the casual sense, it is something more profound. It is a cognitive equilibrium where moral disruption has no purchase. Consequences acknowledged, but internalized cost is nearly zero. The absence of moral friction allows remarkable efficiency. He can plan multiple steps ahead, considering all variables with the precision of a chess master. The sequence of actions, selection, execution, concealment, repetition is internalized as a procedural flow. He can replay events mentally, correct mistakes, anticipate errors in others, and adjust strategy, all without hesitation. In ordinary minds, emotion would intrude, regret, fear, shame. In this mind, calculation rules. Dominance becomes a metric. Control produces clarity. Every human reaction is a data point. Every failure is an opportunity to refine methodology. And because he experiences no emotional penalty, he can continue refining, executing, and repeating with an almost terrifying consistency. This efficiency is reinforced by adaptation. The men who cannot be reached are not static. They study the environment. They learn from observation, from surveillance, from media accounts. They identify patterns in law enforcement, predict investigation techniques, and adjust behavior accordingly. What appears to outsiders as chance or luck is often meticulous preparation and adaptation. They can mask intent with a flawless veneer of normalcy, attending work meetings, participating in social events, maintaining relationships, blending seamlessly into communities. And the more ordinary they appear, the more they are trusted. Normalcy becomes camouflage. Routine becomes protection. Every interaction is rehearsed in subtlety. The right smile, the measured voice, the gesture that reassures observers while leaving no trace of internal empathy. Emotional detachment extends into the minutiae of daily life, where others might agonize over guilt or anticipation of consequence. These men execute acts and move forward, as if the world's moral compass does not apply to them. Internal feedback systems, those brakes that govern social conduct, are either absent or bypassed entirely. There is no lingering self-recrimination, no emotional weight to disrupt planning, no moral alarm to interfere with decision-making. The cognitive landscape is composed entirely of cause and effect, risk and opportunity, observation and action. Pleasure may arise from mastery, from dominance, from testing limits, but it is not derived from emotional connection or moral victory. It is purely functional, the product of a mind calibrated for precision, repetition, and control. Even when confronted with hypothetical scenarios, these men respond logically, strategically, without hesitation. They can articulate what is right, what is expected, what society would deem moral. But these notions do not bind them internally. They can replicate empathy verbally, even convincingly, without experiencing it. They can manipulate investigators, mislead professionals, and construct facades that mirror emotional engagement. This mimicry creates a dangerous illusion, the appearance of conscience where none exists. The deception is not flamboyant. It is subtle, systematic, and refined. Every gesture, every verbal cue, every facial expression is analyzed, rehearsed, and deployed. The observer may feel confidence that moral awareness is present, but it is merely a projection of learned patterns, not genuine reflection. The chilling reality is this: absence of emotion does not imply absence of understanding. They can read social structures, anticipate human reactions, and exploit weaknesses with precision. They can predict consequences with startling accuracy. They can manipulate fear, obedience, and perception with an almost mechanical efficiency. The danger lies not in impulsive rage, but in the quiet, calculated use of knowledge, observation, and internal detachment. In this space, victims are variables. Control is a feedback, and repetition is inevitable because internal deterrence is missing. The world becomes a canvas of opportunity, assessed and acted upon without hesitation, without guilt, without moral friction. Moreover, emotional detachment enables compartmentalization. Public life, private action, and ritual behavior coexist without interference. They can present as socially integrated, functioning, even likable, while orchestrating harm in parallel. The mind partitions responsibility, emotion, and identity in such a way that detection becomes difficult. One compartment masks another. One persona conceals a second, darker operational self. The more sophisticated the individual, the more seamless the compartments. Normalcy is protective, concealment is instinctual, and adaptability is instinctive. The observer sees order and routine. Underneath, the absence of moral checks produces a mechanism of repetition and control that ordinary minds cannot fathom. Understanding this creates unease because it removes the comforting belief that internal breaks exist in everyone. For most, empathy, guilt, and shame act as guides. For these men, those systems are absent. The result is a mind capable of extreme calculation, persistence, and repetition without emotional interference. Action flows uninterrupted. Dominance and control provide feedback. Opportunity guides decisions. Consequence informs strategy. Internal friction is missing, and the chilling realization settles in. Some men are unreachable through conventional emotional, moral, or empathetic appeals. Inside the minds of these men, calculation merges with a chilling fluidity. They are not merely detached, they are adaptive. Each action, each observation, each interaction serves a purpose, a rehearsal for the next iteration. When confronted with a problem, they analyze it with precision, testing variables and anticipating outcomes. Fear, guilt, and empathy, the guiding forces for ordinary humans, are irrelevant. Where others stumble under the weight of conscience, they glide, free from hesitation. What most of us perceive as moral complexity becomes For them, a map of options, probabilities, and efficiency. Emotional absence is not a deficit. It is an enabling condition, a framework within which the mind operates with ruthless clarity. Consider the repeated patterns of interaction. Every social engagement is an experiment. Every response is measured. A smile can pacify, a tone can manipulate, a pause can elicit information. They observe reactions as data, not as moral signals. When someone shrinks from a statement, falters under scrutiny, or hesitates, the mind notes it, internalizes it, and adapts. There is a mechanical quality to this observational process, a cold refinement that grows with every encounter. The individual becomes a master of pretense, capable of mimicking emotion, anticipating expectations, and presenting the illusion of normalcy while maintaining absolute detachment. What outsiders perceive as empathy is a mask, flawlessly crafted to manipulate perception. The mind's capacity for compartmentalization amplifies this effect. Public persona, private action, and internal rehearsal exist in distinct domains, each insulated from the other. Work, social life, family engagements, they all proceed according to societal norms, meticulously observed and enacted. Behind the curtain, actions are driven by calculation and repetition, unburdened by internalized guilt or emotional turbulence. The two selves, public and operational, coexist seamlessly. The ordinary observer sees the first, rarely glimpsing the second, and when suspicion arises, it is often met with disbelief. He seemed so normal. Normalcy, in this case, is not protection for the victim. It is camouflage for the predator. Repeated exposure to consequences or avoidance thereof reinforces the cycle. Where ordinary minds encounter internal deterrence in shame, remorse, or fear, these men rely on external feedback. Punishment, detection, or failure may instruct, but emotional penalty does not. Without internal friction, the calculus becomes sharper. Every successful concealment reinforces methodology. Every avoidance of detection strengthens confidence. Over time, the mind develops what appears to outsiders as infallible precision. Carefully chosen targets, controlled environments, meticulous planning, and seamless execution. Repetition is not chaotic. It is honed, refined, and internalized as a skill, a system, a framework. This detachment extends to relationships with others. Emotional interactions are studied and deployed strategically. Friendship, trust, affection, social bonds, each becomes a tool. Connections exist, but rarely for intrinsic emotional fulfillment. They are functional, a mechanism for information gathering, control, or camouflage. Through these bonds, the mind observes, tests, and manipulates reactions. Compliance becomes measurable. Fear becomes informative. Loyalty becomes predictive. Emotional cues are absorbed as data, guiding subsequent decisions with accuracy, unmatched by those constrained by conscience. The absence of internal resistance allows flexibility, the ability to shift strategies seamlessly without hesitation. Consider the cognitive architecture supporting this behavior. Memory serves as a reference database, cataloging mistakes, responses, and environmental variables. Attention is laser-focused on the consequences of action, timing and sequence, not on the moral ramifications. Emotional disengagement reduces interference, increasing operational efficiency. The mind functions as both analyst and executor with no internal sabotage. In a world where emotion clouds judgment, these men are unencumbered. The result is a pattern of action that is not only sustained over time, but increasingly sophisticated, adaptive, and difficult to anticipate. Even when confronted by authority or evidence, the response is not panic, but assessment. They evaluate the scenario, measure probabilities, and plan subsequent moves. There is no remorse to impede strategy, no fear to slow execution. The absence of internal brakes transforms risk into a series of calculated opportunities. Surveillance, interrogation, and societal norms are obstacles to be navigated, not ethical guidelines to be obeyed. Control is the measure of success. Mastery is the metric. Each interaction, each act of concealment, each procedural step reinforces the pattern. The ordinary mind, governed by conscience, cannot match the adaptive precision of a mind unrestrained by emotion. This is the ultimate challenge for investigators and observers. Traditional methods of engagement appealing to conscience, invoking guilt, encouraging reflection fail. Conventional deterrence, grounded in fear of moral or social consequence, has minimal impact. Emotional and psychological appeals are often meaningless. The mechanisms that regulate human behavior, the internal alarms that prevent harm, are silent. Instead, the mind operates on probability, observation, and repetition, continually refining strategy. The threat is not flamboyant or chaotic. It is methodical, measured, and enduring. The absence of internal conflict allows repetition over months, years, even decades without interruption. And yet, this emptiness is not static. It is dynamic, adapting to circumstance, learning from feedback, and responding to environmental changes. The mind continuously observes, analyzes, and recalibrates. Failures are not emotional crises, but data points. Successes are reinforcement, not moral victory. Interaction, concealment, and control are all constantly refined. Social skills, public facades, and manipulative strategies improve with repetition. The system strengthens with time, producing a predator whose efficiency grows rather than diminishes. The danger lies not in impulse but in mastery, not in chaos but in disciplined, unemotional repetition. For anyone trying to grasp this reality, the unsettling truth is unavoidable. Traditional measures of morality, empathy, and internal restraint do not apply. Some men operate outside the framework most humans rely on to regulate action. They observe, calculate, execute, and refine without interference. Dominance substitutes for empathy. Calculation replaces conscience. External consequence becomes the only limit, and even that can be predicted and avoided with precision. The absence of emotional friction is not merely a trait. It is a mechanism that allows methodical, repeated, and unimpeded harm, hidden beneath the surface of normalcy. The most disturbing aspect of minds that cannot feel is how ordinary they appear while harboring extraordinary capacity for harm. They do not announce themselves with wild behavior or erratic gestures. They do not telegraph evil with dramatic flair. Instead, they move through the world with composure, control, and a surface-level normality that disarms observers. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, and even family can be completely unaware of the darkness beneath. This camouflage is not accidental, it is cultivated, intentional, and reinforced by experience. Each act of concealment, each carefully rehearsed interaction, teaches the mind more about how to appear human, while remaining untethered from morality. In essence, the ordinary becomes a weapon, a shield that protects the exceptional emptiness within. Consider the way these men engage with daily life. At a glance, their routines resemble anyone else's. Work, social gatherings, hobbies, casual interactions. They smile, converse, and comply with social norms, all the while measuring the reactions of those around them. The mimicry is flawless because it is observed, analyzed, and practiced. Every pause, inflection, and expression is calculated to convey trustworthiness, warmth, or emotional engagement. But the underlying emotional signals that most humans produce, unconsciously, the hesitation, the involuntary empathy, the moral alarm are absent. What observers interpret as engagement is, in reality, a performance. A series of strategic gestures designed to manipulate perception. The difference between ordinary humans and these men lies in the invisible architecture beneath the surface. One is guided by empathy, the other by calculation. Emotional detachment allows repetition without degradation. The actions that would traumatize or weigh heavily on most minds, violence, manipulation, or domination, are processed by these men as procedural tasks. Each encounter, each execution, each concealment is catalogued, assessed, and refined. Mistakes are data, not failures of conscience. Successes are reinforcement, not moral affirmation. Over time, the mind becomes increasingly efficient, increasingly predictable only to itself, and nearly impervious to external attempts at intervention. External deterrence laws, societal judgment, or consequences becomes the primary constraint. Internal friction, the moral and emotional checks that usually intervene, is absent, leaving only procedural intelligence to guide behavior. The compartmentalization of self is a critical component. Public life, private deeds, and inner calculation are contained within discrete mental domains. Each compartment interacts with the others only in ways that are strategic, never moral. Work life may be methodical and polite. Social life may be charming and supportive. Private actions may be predatory and meticulous. Internal rehearsal and reflection occur within a separate mental chamber, where emotional engagement is unnecessary, irrelevant, or inaccessible. This separation allows for extraordinary adaptability. One identity masks the other so seamlessly that detection is delayed. Misdirection becomes routine, and trust in ordinary social signals is weaponized against others. Repeated exposure to harmful acts does more than normalize behavior. It strengthens patterns and encourages refinement. The absence of empathy or remorse allows for experimentation, for learning from every interaction and environmental cue without interference. Over time, strategies evolve, methods improve, and the predator becomes more efficient. Planning becomes more precise. Manipulation becomes more subtle. The veneer of normalcy becomes nearly unbreakable. Observers are left confronting a chilling paradox. The more ordinary these men appear, the more extraordinary their capacity for control and harm. The ordinary is no protection. It is concealment, disguise, and camouflage perfected through repetition. External perception is often the only barrier. Investigators, families, and colleagues rely on signs of disturbance to indicate danger. They look for aggression, erratic behavior, or visible suffering. But these markers are irrelevant to men who cannot feel. They produce no internal disturbance, making ordinary detection methods ineffective. Charm, routine, social compliance, and even helpfulness function as camouflage, masking the extraordinary internal processes that permit repeated calculated harm. The danger lies not in chaos, not in volatility, but in composure, foresight, and unemotional precision. Each act, whether subtle manipulation or direct harm, is guided by reason and calculation, not emotional reaction. Gender, social status, or outward presentation offer little predictive value. A man may be charismatic, educated, and socially adept, or quiet, isolated, and unremarkable. What unites these individuals is the absence of emotional friction that would otherwise inhibit harm. Dominance, control, and impact provide internal feedback where empathy would normally intervene. The mind refines strategies through iteration and observation, constantly improving the efficiency of execution and concealment. Repetition is inevitable, mastery is continuous, and adaptation is relentless. When morality does not intrude, opportunity becomes the driver, and consequence becomes the only boundary. To truly grasp the horror, consider the internal experience. No hesitation, no emotional interference, no internal alarms. Calculations dominate. Opportunities are assessed. Human responses are recorded and analyzed. Each success sharpens methodology. Each failure is a lesson, not a moral failure. Normalcy is maintained, while the internal machinery for predation operates at peak efficiency. The mind compartmentalizes, adapts, and perfects its procedures. Observation, control, and repetition continue with cold precision. Emotional engagement is optional, irrelevant, and absent, replaced entirely by functional mechanical evaluation. The world is processed as a system of variables, humans as objects, and consequences as predictable elements. This is why some men cannot be reached, not because they cannot understand, not because they are ignorant, but because the internal mechanisms that restrain ordinary humans, the friction of conscience, empathy, or moral awareness, are missing. They calculate, plan, and execute with a calm efficiency that terrifies investigators and unnerves observers. They learn, adapt, and refine, operating entirely within a framework of control, observation, and procedural reinforcement. The emptiness inside is not chaos. It is structure, discipline, and method. It is the absence of everything that normally prevents extreme harm. And it is this very absence that allows repetition, mastery, and the chilling perpetuation of violence, all while hiding seamlessly beneath the facade of normal life.